Sorry.
Well, let me go ahead and start over again.
Give him a full 5 minutes.
I'm Bob Helland. I'm the endorsed Independence Party candidate for Minnesota. The Independence Party is the third major party in the state. I do want to acknowledge that there is another candidate in this race. His name is Bob Oden. He's a libertarian candidate, so I want you to be aware of all your options. The things you're going to hear me talk a lot about tonight are the fact that I'm the technology candidate in the race. We're all going to be talking about the challenges that this office faces moving forward in implementing new election technology, new business services technology, and a lot of different things, data management that we'll need to administer all the functions of the Secretary of State. And there are a lot of them, and I'm going to try to introduce those as we have a discussion. Things like the Safe at Home program for domestic abuse survivors, certifying international exchange organizations, uniform commercial code access. So there's a lot to talk about. We're certainly going to talk about the elections issues, and I think on that front, I represent the best option as a nonpartisan candidate. I consider myself tripartisan. You know, if bipartisanship was supposed to be good, tripartisanship can only be better, where we're including Democrats, Republicans, and all the rest of us that don't want to stick a color or left and right next to our name. We need to realize that we have an independent choice when our elections come around, and I want to show in this race for Secretary of State that I'm qualified. I'm eager to serve. I've worked for the state for 5 years, and every morning I wake up and say, what can I do today to make the state of Minnesota better? After seeing some problems and trying to make corrections at my former work, I said, when am I going to be ready to be a politician? Something that I encourage all of you to ask yourselves. When are you going to be ready to be politicians? You know, as students who are going to college and getting an education, you're building skills and you're building value that we need in our political and government systems. So do be thinking about that tonight, because when you do end up filing, you're most likely going to be going through the Secretary of State's office. So if it's in the next couple of years, you might be speaking with one of us when you go through those motions. The other thing is I'm going to be talking about that's going to change the way we talk about the Secretary of State races. I consider myself the business services candidate, having worked for the Department of Revenue for 5 years downstream from the Office of Secretary of State. I've talked to tens of thousands of businesses. I've trained hundreds of employees and thousands of employee training hours. And the functions that we provided were registering business for taxes and helping them understand how to stay in compliance. The Secretary of State is really the first gateway that you will typically go through when you set up a corporation, if you set up a nonprofit. So we need to make sure that we have interagency cooperation, we need to have well-trained employees, and we certainly need to have technology systems that meet the needs of Minnesotans, taxpayers, voters, citizens, candidates. We're in the 21st century, so I'm really excited to be here. I'm a first-time candidate. I'm 29 years old. I have a degree in economics from St. Cloud State University, so Dan and I kind of come from the same area of the state, Sauk Rapids, so that's a fun talking point. The thing that I haven't covered yet is, wow, what kind of home field advantage is this to be Bob Helland in the Helland Center tonight? I wish I knew Philip. I wish I had some claim to his fame around Minneapolis community here, but I don't know if we are related. Mom, can you get on the phone and check for me? All right. So we're going to have a lively debate. I'm really thrilled to have your questions. It's awesome that you're all out here. I was in a school the other week, Forest Lake High School, talking to students who were in an elective class for politics, and they wanted to be there. And they had great questions, and I'm sure you guys are going to similarly have great questions and really move this along. So, civic education, you're in the right place. It's something the Secretary of State has responsibility over, and I'll talk more about that. But I think you got an understanding of who I am. I do have pamphlets and t-shirts, and I will be sticking around afterward if you'd like to talk with me. So I'll yield the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Helland. Mr. Steve Severson, would you like to begin?
Thank you. I'm Dan Severson, running for the Office of Secretary of State. And we'd like to give you a brief overview of why I believe I'm the best candidate of those sitting out here for this important constitutional position. I grew up in central Minnesota, as Bob said, graduated with a bachelor's degree in physics, commissioned in the United States Navy in 1979, and for 22 years I served this amazing nation protecting our liberties and our freedoms. I want to emphasize the fact that protecting our Constitution and its freedoms it enumerates is a passion of mine, and I've served as a Navy fighter pilot, acquiring over 320 carrier landings. I served in a large number of executive positions in the Navy, and in 1970 received a Meritorious Service Medal from the Chief of Naval Operations, who was kind of like the governor for the U.S. Navy. And that was because of implementing plans and policies awarded and data management in Washington, D.C. Once retired, I joined the private sector in a startup company and worked on a patent dealing with space communication, free space communications, which is being developed even further today. In 2002, I ran for the Minnesota House of Representatives and won by 321 votes out of 15,000 cast. That was the first political foray I had been in, did door knocking for the majority of a year, and we came close. We basically pulled it out at the last. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about was the importance of integrity in elections. I served 8 years in the Minnesota legislature, 2 in the leadership position, and during the 2008 cycle, I investigated allegations of voter fraud as a sitting representative and could not get a resolution on allegations of voter fraud from the city clerk all the way up to the Minnesota Supreme Court. The system was broken, and it still is. As a result of that failed investigation, I ran for Secretary of State in 2010, as you heard. If I, as a sitting representative, could not get answers, and some of you out there may have seen some fraud, and if you can't get answers, it gets very frustrating. What chance does the average citizen have of getting any kind of justice in that process? So, here is an important fact. Over 500,000 same-day registrations were filed in 2008, of which we still have no answers as to the origin of 6,224 from that election, with a U.S. Senate seat decided by 312 votes, which subsequently gave us Obamacare and turned 1/6 of our economy over to government control. The importance of clean, verifiable elections cannot be overstated. Additionally, our military is being disenfranchised. In 2010, just 687 of our warfighters got to cast a vote that counted. With between 12 and 14,000 members serving, that means that over 90% have no voice in determining our elected leaders. If any minority group or ethnic community had that kind of participation rate, we would be incensed. But this Secretary of State and the Elections Oversight Committee has turned a deaf ear to this plight. This is unacceptable to virtually every Minnesotan, regardless of party affiliation. And I will work to bring that number up from 5% of the general population participation of 60 to 75%. I'm passionate about accountability in government. In the words of Brian Rice, Representative Kahn's attorney, in a potential voter fraud story that broke just this few months ago, if we don't have clean elections, we don't have a democracy. He gets it. Representative Kahn, a former opponent of photo ID, gets it, but we will hear rhetoric about it's only fabrication, and the people of Minnesota don't deserve that protection. There's a mountain of evidence that speaks to the contrary. However, the office is not just about elections. It's about 70% of the duties has to do with business, as Bob was talking about, and filings and overseeing the Safe at Home program. I've been in the private sector for both profit and nonprofit, and they've been working in other communities to meet their needs. I have a unique perspective on how the office can be of assistance to the business and civic involvement areas. Most importantly, the Secretary of State should be nonpartisan in execution. My commitment to the citizens of Minnesota is to serve in a nonpartisan, as I did while in the military, protecting our country and our Constitution. I have a long, distinguished record of working across the aisle contrary to some of the allegations I've heard. To that end, the Secretary of State means being an ambassador for the people of Minnesota, promoting private sector business and protecting the Constitution and its integrity. I swore an oath for 35 years when commissioned in the United States Navy, and I've never backed off from that commitment. I'm looking forward to the debate tonight, or to the discussion, the questions, and hearing what you have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Severson. Mr. Simon, you may begin.
Well, thank you very much. First, I want to thank MCTC. I want to thank the Severson Center for hosting this forum. I I'm particularly gratified by the fact that this is mostly, as I understand it, student-led, student-organized, student-driven. I think that's a wonderful thing to kick off these exchanges. So congratulations to all, and thank you for everyone who organized this. So as you heard, I'm Steve Simon, and I'm the Democratic Party candidate for Secretary of State. And I'm running because I think in this office we always need someone who's going to put Minnesota's interests above politics. Now that means a couple different things, at least. First, it means someone who's going to be fair. Just plain fair. Someone who is an honest broker, someone who has the trust and confidence from all different kinds of people, even people who might not have supported for them or might not have voted for them. In fact, arguably, especially those people. So you need someone who's fair and who's not going to put their thumb on the scale, so to speak, for a preferred candidate or for a preferred cause when it comes to an election in Minnesota. There's no place for that in this office. So we need that fairness and we need that nonpartisanship. Second, we need someone who, when it comes to the office's most important mission, which is protecting, preserving, defending, and strengthening the right to vote. When it comes to that mission, we need someone who is all about more access. That means opening the doors of participation wide open and keeping them open for all eligible voters and not slamming them in people's faces. We don't need more barriers or burdens or hoops or hurdles for eligible voters in Minnesota, period. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my background. So I come from not too far from here, Hopkins, Minnesota, and I represent Hopkins and St. Louis Park in the legislature. I grew up in Hopkins, went to Hopkins High School and Hopkins schools, and I currently live in Hopkins with my wife, Leah, and our 2 kids under 2. You heard that right. That makes campaigning a little bit interesting. All right, 2 kids under 2, Hannah and Noah. And I've been a state representative since 2004 when I won election for that seat, representing that area. And I got to tell you, since day one in the legislature, and even beforehand, I have been passionate about and very, very deeply engaged in issues of democracy, ballot access, election reform, voter rights. Those are the core things that make up our democracy. And so many people, let's face it, have fought and bled and died for those rights. So they're worth preserving and they're worth protecting. So sometimes people ask, well, you know, what made you so passionate about elections and election law and democracy and access? Well, I have a story that's not an uncommon story in Minnesota or anywhere else, and it's kind of an immigrant story. My mother was an immigrant from Austria, but on my father's side, my great-grandparents came to this country from Poland and Lithuania. And to say the least, they were part of an oppressed minority. They were mistreated, they were targeted, they couldn't practice their own religion, they didn't have a voice, they didn't have a say in how they were governed, and they sure as heck did not have a vote. And they came to this country and to this state of Minnesota, and finally, after a long struggle, they had all of those things, which is worth remembering for all of us. And it's not just my family, it's many people's family as well who have similar situations. So I think that's very important. Now, let me give you an example of something I'm very proud of that's new this year that fuses together the 2 things I talked about. Nonpartisanship and fairness on the one hand and access on the other. Some of you know that this year we have a new law in the books called No Excuses Absentee Voting, or Vote by Mail. My proudest accomplishment, I worked on it for 7 years, and it means that for the first time in state history, anyone in this room and anyone in Minnesota who's eligible to vote can vote from home, can vote absentee by mail for any reason or no reason. The old rule was that you had to have an excuse. You had to sign an oath under penalty of perjury that you were going to be out of town that day, but you don't have to do that anymore. And over the 7 years when I was working on this, I thought often of my dad. My dad is 81 years old, he's disabled, he uses a walker, he can't drive a car, and I always thought, why should someone like that, who's done all the right things, who's worked hard, who's played by the rules, who's been a great dad, by the way, why should he have to give anyone an alibi or an excuse for why he needs the comfort and convenience of voting from his kitchen table or from his couch or wherever? He shouldn't, and now he doesn't. And that makes me proud as a son, and it makes me proud as a Minnesotan. In Minnesota, we've been first out of 50 in voter turnout for 9 out of the last 9 elections. That's something worth bragging about and being proud of. And I think the reason is we have a good thing going. Always in need of some reform and tweaking and change, of course, but we have a high degree of trust and confidence in our system, and that's borne out by the high turnout. So the stakes are high. I'm the first to admit to you that Secretary of State never gets the press and never gets the attention, of course, of a governor's race or a Senate race. But you know what? No matter what issue we all care about in this room, whether it's crushing student debt burdens, whether it's environmental protection or civil rights, all roads lead to the ballot box. And if we don't have clean and fair and accessible and honest and secure elections, we're not going to get very far on any of those issues. So again, I'm Steve Simon, I'm the Democratic Party candidate, and the name of the game is nonpartisanship and access. And thanks for your time and attention. I look forward to a good exchange tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your opening remarks.